So this chapter is going to be a little slower. This is just purely going in and refining some of the forms. You know, it's starting to thread the balance or the line between man and woman. There are some manly elements in there, but there's also some, you know, female elements, more feminine elements in there. So this chapter is all about refining form. It's very slow. You know, we've sped this up out of interest, you know, for you guys, because
for your sanity,
for your sanity, because that has been the key to this whole tutorial, has been subtlety. And I think when I was sculpting the man, that took me around 6 hours. Sculpting the woman also took me around 6 hours. But for most of that time sculpting this character, it was just the move tool. You know, just move something a little bit here, you know, a little bit there, just tiny changes to see how it affects the character. And I was kind of afraid to, like, how do we make this interesting? Because it is just subtlety. But I'm hoping that's also kind of you have to have patience. I feel like a lot more patience when you're sculpting women, because it's easy to get impatient because you're not getting to that look that you want. And you add a little bit too much fat or a little bit too much skin, like I'm doing underneath the mouth here now, and you get a too pronounced barrel of the mouth. You don't want that. So it's constantly going back and forth between these things of when is it too masculine and when is it just feminine enough but has that slightly sexy look, you know? So it's a fine balance.
It's also so hard to make tutorials like this, because if this were to be real time, you wouldn't really be able to see the differences. Yeah, sure, now there is some more drastic stuff happening for the lips here, but a lot of it is just going to be, you know, it would be like watching grass grow, where there's definitely stuff happening, and it's dramatic if you watch it in fast forward, but it needs to be fast enough, otherwise you can't see anything.
Yeah.
Because it's like pulling the ear a little. Changes. Subtle changes. But all these subtle changes, they really do add up to it.
Yeah, like so I think, you know, at some point, maybe that's in chapter, I would guess 10 or so, I reached the 10,000 undo step. You know, that's the maximum undo steps you can have. So I would guess maybe 15,000 undo steps in total. So that's 15,000 small changes that all add up to make a face. You know, that's a lot.
Yeah, there isn't like the event of the face being made. There isn't, you don't have these like 3 strokes or whatever. It's 15,000 very small steps.
Exactly. So, and you know, as you get better as a sculptor, this would be the case for me. You know, I'm able to do it in less and less steps. You know, you have a master sculptor. He's able to very precisely, every single stroke that he makes counts towards something where I might place 5 or 10. So, and that'll be the same for someone who's just starting out. Maybe you have to place 100 where someone else has to place 10. So,
or maybe you can't even get there. If you're a beginner, you realistically won't really be able to get to the end result of this tutorial in some time. It just takes time to learn this.
Yeah.
It's like if you were to learn a language, you can't just mimic what somebody's saying. You can't just monkey see, monkey do and try to mimic it. It's not going to sound right.
No.
You need a different foundation.
Yeah, I never want to sell people the dream that, obviously this tutorial is like sculpting a realistic woman, but it doesn't mean that you will possess the skills to sculpt that exactly like this after the tutorial.
No.
You will have a lot of things you've been able to take away from the tutorial and have learned to sort of like apply when you're sculpting yourself, but getting to the same result, especially if you're just starting out, that's just going to take you a few years.
Yeah, it's like what you keep talking about. You watch the Felipe Faro videos when they were sculpting faces.
Yeah.
That
I learn something new every time.
Yeah.
You know,
every single time. So if you can't sculpt this face right away, you know, just go back and rewatch the video. Keep going back to it once in a while, and you will see new things, guaranteed.
So again, here it's we talked about with the Loomis features. I'm trying to figure out where have I placed the features and are they as I want them to be. Not entirely with the eyes. Like again, I went out in in Photoshop, did a little liquify on it, paint over to see, okay, how can I optimize this? How can I make it better compared to some of my reference? And you know, what I'll do between every session is I'll always do this, always go out and look at my references in more detail, because I can be more engaged with my reference when I'm not sculpting, because when I'm sculpting, my focus is like 50-50. Someone sculpting, someone reference. But when I'm just looking at the reference, I can be more objective about the reference. But like, okay, I want this part from there. And then I'll note it down. So on my second monitor, at the start of a chapter, I will always make a list of things I want to change. Because maybe I'll have 20 things and I won't be able to remember that for the next chapter. So that's just something I do when I sculpt.
Yeah, I also think it's a good idea to space this out over a few days as well. If you're sculpting this in one session, that means you won't have time to reflect over it. Whenever I'm sculpting faces, and I go out in public, I always specifically look at that thing. Whatever it is I'm doing in CG, if I'm doing shading, I'll look at how light works and something, Fresnel angle and all that kind of stuff. If I'm doing faces, and I'm sculpting a mouth, I'm just going to be looking at people's mouths. And that level of observation is always helping me. There's always something new I'm learning from that.
Again, the transpose lines are really effective as a measurement tool. And just, you know, at this point, maybe I don't want to go in with a Damien standard and cut into my model to figure out where are things placed. So the transpose lines can come in handy there. You can just, by default, it's the standard gizmo that pops up. But if you just press the Y key on your keyboard, that switches to the transpose lines.
Yeah, I still prefer the transpose lines than a bunch of different things because you can measure, and I just feel I have more control with them.
Yeah.
The new gizmo is really nice if you want to move like stuff 6 units or whatnot, or you're moving the eyes up and down. But the transpose lines are in no way obsolete. No. They're just a different tool. And you can still see it's very low res at this point.
Actually still is. And you know, the eyes are actually going to get left like this for a while in terms of the low resness. As long as I can get the general shape, I'll tend to wait with the eyes. I'll tend to wait with detailing things like the lid and the caruncula and the inside of the eye until most other things are settled, until I'm happy with other things. Because if I can get just a sort of expression across that I want from the eyes, I'll be happy with that for a while. And again, struggling with this mouth shape. You can change the mouth so much depending on, you know, from the philtrum, if you have a straight line down to the corner of the mouth, or if it curves out, that changes the expression and the face completely. So it's playing with these different things, the width of the mouth, and where it sits, you know, the distance from, like I said, from the philtrum down to the mouth, and then from the lower lip to the chin, that can change it a lot as well. One thing that I tend to avoid doing, you can see here I'm trying to erase some of the masseter. That's another thing that will make your sculpt more manly, is from the jaw, like the back of the jaw, up towards your cheekbones. If you have like this diagonal line, the masseter muscle goes up there. If you indicate that in like a more pronounced way, that'll make your sculpt look more masculine. So that's something that I'm erasing and trying to minimize on this sculpture. And you can see that you're actually able to get quite a lot of detail out of not a lot of resolution. You know, you can define most things that you need to define. Maybe they're a little oversized because you don't have as many polygons as you need. But again, it forces me to not get stuck and not get bogged down with details at this level. Because if I wanted to define the eyes more, I would have to re-dynamesh it at higher resolution, but that means everything gets a higher resolution. And then I might be more inclined to sculpt high-res ear or high-res mouth or something. So I only move on when I'm fully happy.
Yeah, you could also use Sculptris Pro, where you could get more resolution, or you could locally subdivide it. But I still think it's a good idea to put the current artificial limitations on yourself.
Yeah.
Because it means that you can't just have a super crazy detailed eye and have a very low res mouth. Like, you don't want that. You want to bring everything up at the exact same time.
You will see later in the series that we are going to go with different resolutions in terms of subdivision. Like the mouth, nose, and eyes get subdivided one level above everything else, just because I want more detail in there. But then I'm keeping everything fairly low res because I want the ability to pose it afterwards. Sculptures Pro could also be really nice for that. I tried experimenting with it, but subdividing like locally worked better for me.
Yeah, it's also like the different stage as well. We're not saying you shouldn't detail your models because you have to. In order for it to look realistic, you need details. Otherwise, it can look very stylized.
Yeah,
it's more you detail when the time is right, and the time isn't right when your skull isn't working and the features aren't working.
Another thing that you can see, I just slightly indicated it here. Just like a little bit of a ridge with the Damien standard brush, or maybe even the regular standard brush, just around the lip, tends to give your lips a more feminine look. But from here, we're still left with some parts that look more masculine, some parts that look feminine, and especially the way her mouth and her chin protrude. I think I'll be pulling that back a little bit, and then definitely going in and cleaning up the forms, because right now it's a little undulated here and there. You can't get, even if you're working with the smooth brush as well as the clay brush, you're never going to get perfect form right away. You will have to do some cleanup at some point.
Yeah. Well, the way I prefer to do cleanup for this is the clay build-up brush with no alpha and a very low intensity, like 2 or 3, 5 maybe. Because that way you can really just get rid of all those little things, that little undulation.
So we definitely have, it's interesting now at this point, we have this mix of, there are boyish features in there that could be maybe from like a teenage boy, but then there are also elements which could be from a woman. So it's like, it's such a tricky line to thread. Like where do you make it more feminine and where do you make it more masculine?
It's also tricky because this is something we talk about in some of our other videos, where people forget that the real world exists. Where right now you might be looking at your model and be like, man, it doesn't look like a woman. Yeah, she's bald.
It doesn't have eyebrows.
Yeah, and eyelashes and no makeup or anything like that. Like it's. The shape here is starting to look pretty good, but it's not going to get there.
No.
Unless, you're going for a bold woman, which, definitely some merit to that as well. But if you want something which looks really feminine, you need to add the remaining parts of it.
Yeah, hair tends to do plays a big role in that. The type of eyebrows that you choose as well. The makeup, can totally be omitted if your other forms are working together.
Yeah.
But obviously, makeup is a huge part of if you're texturing a woman, for example, unless it's a natural look.
Yeah, and even then you might still want some subtle.
Yeah, just enhance the eyelashes a little bit, that kind of stuff.
No makeup sometimes doesn't mean no makeup. It just means
it's very well done.
Very well done makeup. Yeah, it's one of these where, in real life, people pay so much attention to their hair, the makeup, the clothing, and all that. But in CG, you forget it. You're just looking at, but the shapes and the things. Yeah, but you can't disregard fashion.
No. My fashion here is she'll be completely naked.
It's pretty nice as well.
Another thing in terms of masculine and feminine differences here with the lip, you can see I just erased the lower part of the lip, which had this more square look. You can make that look feminine for sure, but a softer, rounder lip tends to look more feminine. Any sort of angle will tend to look more masculine. And you can have that and stylize that to a degree in your sculptures. If you do that on the nose, or if it's the eyelids, for example, the upper eyelid, you can add some angles to that, or add some angles to the lips. That also makes it masculine. But in my case, sculpting a woman, so I want to try and get rid of most of those. But it is interesting how some features can overlap between men and women, and if the other features of your sculpture, if you're sculpting a woman, are feminine enough, can support some more manly features, and tends to look quite beautiful.
It is also interesting how we can, if you're looking at a man or a woman, you can just instantly recognize it. There is no ambiguity in it.
No.
But if you were to think, why?
Yeah.
Why did I instantly recognize this person here as a woman and this is a man? Same if you're hearing somebody's voice as well. Like, there is basically no ambiguity whatsoever. And then if you were to simplify it even more and just look at their look at the scan of them. There is no smell or hair
No.
or whatever. It's pure shape, and you're like, I am not actually sure why I can recognize this as a woman instantly.
Yeah.
But it's all the subtleties which we've been talking about now. The subtle plane changes here and there, and all these little things. It's not like it's one thing. It's not that you have like a woman card. It's everything. It's all the small little things.
You can actually have that with transgender people as well. Whereas sometimes, if it's a man or a woman, whatever, there will always be certain features structurally that is just inherent to that gender. So there are some things that are just there, and that's something that we're really in tune with, because we look at it every day. We look at people every day. So it's really. Sometimes it's easier to pick up on than others, for sure.
And if you're from pure evolutionary point of view, it's pretty important that you figure out if it's a man or a woman.
Yeah, exactly.
Instantaneously.
So I think we've upped the resolution now. Maybe? I think so. Here I'm just indicating the shape it's to point out to look from your skull or look at your model from behind as well, a 3/4 behind, not just the front 3/4, because this allows you to figure out the relationship between your forehead and the brow, and then how does that shape go into the cheek and ultimately down to the chin. So just varying the angle and occasionally checking from angles that you wouldn't normally look at is very, very beneficial to you. Another thing that on average, this is not the case for all women, but on average, a woman's skull tends to be a little smaller than a man's skull. You might not be able to see that when you're just sculpting like this, because you're sculpting in, out of context, sculpting next to a man, for example. But you could balance that out with the body, for example, just make the skull a little smaller.
Yeah, it is interesting, all these features we keep talking about, how, if everything is a bit round or a bit smaller or a bit more feminine. Then if you want to, make something very feminine, like you want an instant read, you're doing a Disney princess, whatever, it has to just be instant. You just exaggerate those features. Yeah. And then if you want to feel masculine, you just do the opposite. And then, men in general have more square jaws. You just make it completely square. You make like Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, and you just go full on, just so that there is absolutely no ambiguity whatsoever. Like if you want to stylize it, or particularly if you want to do like a male animal versus a female animal, where you don't necessarily have the same traits as we normally have to look for, but then square jaw versus soft jaw. These subtle little things can make a huge difference in the instant read.
Yeah. And this is not so much to make crazy nasolabial folds and folds in the face. It's just more for you guys so I can indicate where are my plane changes and how do I want the shape to change going through the face.